Wolfpack Nation, we are here today to break down probably one of the biggest games NC State's had in quite some time here. We have on here Lawton Swann here with us from the Clemson podcast. Again, first of all, thank you so much, Lawton, for joining us. Really do appreciate it today.
Yeah, good to be with you guys, and certainly looking forward to a big game in Death Valley under the lights. Game day is going to be there, so I know it's got to be exciting for Wolfpack Nation.
Absolutely. Well, again, I mean, it's great being to this point. You know, I know that Dorn and Dabo have had their back and forth from time to time, but overall, I mean, I know there's a lot of respect there. And both the guys are relatively young, for what they've done so far. Obviously hats off to Dabo and hats off to the Clemson, for taking a shot on a wide receiver coach and then working out in dividends. So got to give the shout outs there for that. But want to get, first of all, make sure, again, if you haven't already, make sure, hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out whenever we release any new NC State content. And also to give us a follow, Tuffy Talk Now on Twitter and Instagram. And if you're a big NC State fan just like us, make sure to hit that like button as well. But jumping right into Lawton, so obviously, again, I think, it's an interesting time. And, obviously for Clemson, they just got off of a nail-biter win for sure against number 21 Wake Forest at Wake Forest. So first of all, were you at that game? Or are you watching it from your house or what?
No, I took it in from here. I haven't been up to Wake in a couple of seasons. Obviously, with just at this point, there's so much coverage that you can get from home, especially now that they do all the Zoom post games. I mean, it really sometimes it just doesn't make sense. I've got all my computer screens right here, and I'm able to cut video from the game while it's happening. So it's just kind of a advantage, but no, I mean, we do go to all the home games and certainly would travel if it's a major bowl game, et cetera. And I've got some guys that go to, they were at the Georgia Tech game over in Atlanta to kick off the year, but this past weekend, noon kickoff, I was like, you know what, my kids had soccer matches. I'll just settle in right here and go do that in the AM and then get the afternoon rolling.
That makes sense. So tell me, what were your kind of initial thoughts about that game? What were some things that stood out to you? What were some things that seemed to be of worry for you?
Yeah, I think schematically, Clemson's defense really struggled with Wake Forest and that slow mesh. And I think you watch it and you say to yourself, okay, why does this work? And so Clemson just kind of, I don't want to say that Wes Goodwin, I guess the best terminology would be that Wes Goodwin didn't want to force Wake Forest hands, but he kind of just played into what they wanted to do. I mean, he kept one safety. They continued to throw the football down the field. Clemson's corners were on islands, which is something we were accustomed to at Clemson when Brent Venables was there. But, this is something that you have to adjust to. And Sam Hartman, and the wide receivers for Wake Forest, I mean, they've been together for years, and they just looked in sync very early. Clemson had some depth issues in the secondary, had 3 guys out. So that kind of exacerbated the problem. And ultimately, Wake Forest took advantage of that. And it wasn't until the fourth quarter where Clemson finally just said, okay, we're just going to let you guys run the ball if that's what you choose to do. We're going to have two safeties. We're going to play some Tampa 2 coverage. We're going to force you guys to try to run the football and really take it out of Sam Hartman's hands. I mean, Hartman had 6 touchdowns in the game. I mean, he looked sharp all day long. And once that happened, slowed the pace. Wake Forest didn't get the big chunk plays, and Clemson just continued to kind of overwhelm them with talent and came away with a victory. It was a hard-fought one for sure. But I think if Clemson had switched up the defense a little earlier, and this may speak to Wes Goodwin's adjustment. I mean, he's a guy that's sort of a relatively unknown. He was on the staff, but people didn't know who he was. If you'd have shown a picture of 4 people and said, pick Wes Goodwin, nobody could have done it. And so the thing about it is you've got a guy that I think is trying to catch up to the nuances of being a game day coordinator, and the guy across from you changing his playbook, and you're trying to adjust to that on the fly. And I think you've seen some rust from him in terms of getting used to that. And so I think as he goes along, he'll get better at it. I think anybody would. But for now, I think what you saw was sort of a stubbornness maybe from Wes Goodwin. And I think that'll be a good lesson for him moving forward.
Yeah. Well, because definitely one of the headlines for me, especially this offseason, was obviously Brett Venables deciding to move on, finally and take an opportunity to get a head coaching job at a premier head coaching job like Oklahoma, and then you got Tony Gibson get an opportunity to go across the river to Virginia for the ACC. And so to me, it really kind of stood out to me that I think you and I could both agree that Dabo Swinney could have called any offensive and any defensive coordinator in the country, and they probably would have taken him up on the opportunity to come to Clemson. And so the fact that you decided, instead of doing that, to hire or to promote somebody internally to take over those roles, to me seemed like a huge gamble, because I mean it could work out for sure, and I mean especially too because I know that the assistant coaching staff has been with Dabo for a long time. I know that Dabo doesn't really have too much attrition, really. So, most of those guys have had an opportunity to work with Tony Gibson, work with Brett Venables. But, from a risk standpoint, do you kind of agree that, I mean, it's kind of a high risk, high reward thing, because you don't necessarily know, because it's not like they're established coordinators, just like you were saying, they don't necessarily know who Wes Goodwin is, but, it'd be easy that if Clemson's defense doesn't, become what talent wise it should be, that it could be an easy thing to point out, being like, well, that guy wasn't really an established coordinator, before this season. Would you kind of agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's tough though, because so when Sweeney
Mm-hmm.
got the job, of course, he was a wide receivers coach. He had never been a coordinator, and he got the head
Right.
coaching job back in '08 after Clemson lost, ironically, to Wake Forest, and Sweeney took over from Tommy Bowden, and he made Billy Napier, who's now the head coach at Florida, the offensive coordinator. Well, a couple of years in to that scenario, and Napier was on the staff, and so a couple of years into that, it wasn't working out, and he got rid of Billy Napier and
Yep.
then brought in Chad Morris. And at that time, Chad Morris had been a guy who had coached high school football, and then had been at like Tulsa, and people were like, well, this is it. Sweeney's taking a shot. It's either going to go good or it's not, and Clemson's going to fire him, and they'll change head coaches. And so
Mm-hmm.
that move worked out. And so I think he's been very calculated. I think he's been very wise. When Chad Morris left, he looked in-house
Mm-hmm.
and kept Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott as co-offensive coordinators. And then Clemson went on that incredible run that you saw, a couple of national titles and all the college football playoff appearances. And so, to me, he's made the right moves. And that's where you
Mm-hmm.
just have to trust him, right? Kevin Steele was the defensive coordinator. They get blitzed by West Virginia, like 70-33 in the Orange Bowl. He says, all right, that's not going to do. Goes out and gets arguably the best defensive coordinator in college football, and Brent Venables. It takes him a
Absolutely.
while. I mean, Florida State came into Death Valley very early on in Brent Venables' career, and at Clemson, and put up 50 some odd points when they had Jameis Winston and those guys back in
Yeah.
2003. So his moves have worked out. I think he wouldn't make this move if he didn't believe that it would work. And so that's where I think you just have to kind of roll with some of the hiccups early on in game day operations, because that's something, we talk about this a lot with players, right? Coaches say this all the time. They go, well, you can't simulate that. You can't simulate that at practice. And
Mm-hmm.
so what you can't simulate at practice is what Wes Goodwin's dealing with now as a defensive coordinator, is that other guy playing chess against you and, just trying to figure it out as quickly as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and because kind of talking about Wake Forest too, and Michael, sorry, I'll let you take it over. I just want to ask one more thing. So, finishing up with the kind of the Wake Forest game, obviously I know that a lot of fans could really look at going, especially late in the game, how it was a huge head scratcher, how Wake Forest was almost throwing the ball at will, but wasn't able to do much on the ground, and rightfully so, especially with Clemson's defensive line as good as they are. And so for Wake Forest late in the game to go so conservative, I think was honestly the thing that kind of was really what, broke the camel's back, for Wake Forest. They should have been more aggressive and really went for an opportunity to go and try and win the game instead of settling for overtime. And Clemson made them pay for it. So, do you kind of see this as kind of an opportunity of, that, obviously with Wake Forest aside, it's definitely kind of you got away from it there, because I think that there were times where Wake Forest seemed to be the better team for sure. DJ definitely made some plays where he needed to, and obviously Will Shipley, I think that touchdown, where he basically just willed himself across the goal line was very impressive for sure. So do you see, the players potentially after a game like that, kind of looking at it as kind of like we got out of it, kind of like the same thing with us, like with ECU, that, even though late in the game we were not the better team, we still found a way to win. At the end of the day, we found a way to win. So, kind of same thing with Clemson there. They just found a way to win, so we're going to make the best out of it.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit. They're certainly disappointed. The good news is they don't want to be playing their best football week 4. They want to be playing their best football in the final couple of weeks of the season and gearing up for like an ACC championship or the college football playoff. So, Dabo Swinney will tell you it's a developmental game, and they're just trying to get better every week. They certainly weren't perfect. No team is. You mentioned that game with East Carolina, and if East Carolina had a kicker, worth whatever you want to say, 10 cents or whatever, they win that ball game. But it just didn't work out for them. And so, it happens. You take a deep breath, you move on to the next one. I was asked on a radio show up in Greenville the other day. They said, "Look, do you think if Clemson wins every game by 1 point the rest of the way, that they would be in the college football playoff?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. You'd be undefeated ACC champion." So whether it's by 100, regulation, double overtime, you got to win the game, and that's what Clemson did. So I'm sure they're very excited about it. They're not going to not celebrate, believe me, because Dabo Swinney will tell you it's hard to win. So yeah, I think they'll move forward and they'll learn a lot from the tape.
Absolutely. Before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about our sponsor, Flatlands Jessup Insurance Group, that has your whole world covered, with agents in 5 offices throughout eastern North Carolina to help you decide how much coverage you need. Offering policies for home and auto, recreational vehicles, commercial, crop, health, life, and employee benefits. They are able to combine options to find a comprehensive solution that works for you. Flatlands Jessup protects the things you love so you can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying them. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Flatlands Jessup. You can also visit their webpage at www.flatlandsjessup.com. So please make sure to go and check them out.
So what's the biggest difference you've seen with the new coordinators, or has there really not been that many and they're just kind of trying to establish the continuity there?
Yeah, I mean, Brandon Streeter had been a part of this staff for a while, right? And he had worked with DJ, so he's, I think, pretty comfortable. And that change doesn't feel nearly as significant as the change on the defensive side of the ball, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. But I do think that when it comes down to, just kind of growing in that role, both sides still are very much doing so. I mean, Clemson rarely attacked the middle of the field in the first 3 ball games. I mean, it was rare. It was rare that the tight ends touched the ball. In this game, the tight ends had 10 receptions, 108 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, that's another addition to this offense that I think can really help DJ become more comfortable. And that's part of the problem that he had a year ago. I mean, they had so many guys get hurt. They had, just injuries galore. And I think DJ lost a lot of confidence in being willing to throw the ball into tight windows, because he didn't feel like the wide receiver who, when you look at as good as Clemson's been, right? Trevor Lawrence had guys like T. Higgins and Justin Ross and Amari Rodgers to throw the ball to. And last year, all the stud wide receivers were banged up. And so the final game of the season, Dabo Swinney's son, Will, is the starting wide receiver against South Carolina. And it wasn't a rib. It wasn't a, hey, let's get my son in the game. It was, who do we have? And so, that takes his confidence away, because a guy that, if you put a ball in a 50-50 spot and you've got wide receivers that you think are going to make an 80-20 catch, they're going to find a way to make that grab, versus guys that you don't feel that way about. You and I would both start sailing the football and throwing it high because we don't want to put it in peril. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've seen in terms of the offense and the adjustment, is that DJ right now is very comfortable, very confident, calm. And you even saw it on Saturday. And I don't know, I haven't had a chance to watch any games of NC State's outside of that opener against East Carolina. But, if you go back and watch this game between Clemson, the condensed version of these games is fantastic, by the way, for your listeners that don't watch the condensed games. But if you go back and watch it, you'll see DJ does not panic in the pocket. And there are people at his feet. He makes the 2-point conversion late in that game. on one leg. He's doing the hokey pokey. He's got a guy on his leg.
Yeah.
He's kicked back.
That was crazy.
To kind of stay in yourself with all that happening tells me that he's right up here. And I don't think he was right up here a year ago.
Yeah. Well, and because too, I think that even, the games leading up to yesterday's game, that Clemson necessarily didn't look stout offensively. It's not like, for like Furman, for example, they were putting 70 up on Furman. So I mean, definitely yesterday I saw a different side for DJ for sure. Obviously putting up 371 and 5 touchdowns is very impressive, against Wake Forest, even though I know that we can all agree that Wake Forest is probably not on the better half of the better defenses in the country for sure, but you knew going into it was going to be more of a shootout with obviously just dealing with the punches that Sam Hartman was going to give. You knew that. So kind of talk to me, because obviously I think for me, when Georgia Tech, when Clemson played Georgia Tech in the post game, Dabo Swinney basically talked about how he was very happy with DJ. And one of the kind of immediate head scratchers to me was, this is a guy that during his tenure, especially over the last 10 years, has had guys like Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watson, Kelly Bryant, Trevor Lawrence, guys that were elite quarterbacks that really were great in the system. And up until that point, I feel like DJ hadn't really had that elite moment besides the Notre Dame game when he stepped in for Trevor Lawrence. That was obviously, seemed to be kind of a head scratcher point then. So do you really foresee DJ being, because I mean, I know like from a high school recruit wise that, I mean, he was up there as one of the best high school quarterback recruits, but just to me, it just seems like that DJ doesn't quite have, and I know too, even the weapons, even too, to really have what it takes in order to take that elite step. But I mean, tell me otherwise. I mean, I know that obviously yesterday it seemed like definitely DJ took a step forward, but I mean, I think that we can agree that it'll be an interesting test to see what he can do against a defense like NC State that's very experienced and also has a lot of talent to it. And also too has been fairly healthy up until this point as well.
Yeah, I think that he's certainly shown, I've said since that game against Notre Dame, and then once you started to see him struggle last year, I could not put myself in the belief that was like a one-off. Like you just couldn't tell me that a kid could go there, throw for more yards than anybody else has thrown against Notre Dame, and that guy's still not in there somewhere. And so that's what I think has been so positive about this year is you do feel like you're starting to see that guy. And so the good news for Clemson will be that this game's in Death Valley. Because you're right, the NC State defense up till this point will be the best defense that Clemson will face. And there may be an argument to be made that in the Atlantic Coast Conference, it ends up being the best defense that Clemson will see all year.
Yeah.
But DJ is not going to have to deal with fans raining down on him the whole game and all of that comes along with being on the road in a matchup like this. So I think that's to his advantage, going into this game that he's at home. And, I think that he's going to be confident. And the biggest concern I would say would be if NC State comes out and gets a quick turnover, maybe 2, does he sink back to that same kind of thought process or where he was a year ago? Because then I think it'll be a long day for Clemson.
Yeah.
But if he comes out and if Clemson scores quick and kind of like they did against Wake Forest and they feel good about themselves, then I think it flips to the other side where there's a lot of pressure on Devin Leary and NC State, and that environment's going to be a night game. It's going to be, in Clemson's defense is certainly going to be the toughest defense I think that NC State's going to face in the Atlantic Coast Conference. And so from that standpoint, that's where the kind of shoe could go on the other foot where, hey, does Devin Leary perform like he has throughout his career? And I know this year's been a little slower start for him. And so, when he gets under those lights, that's going to be kind of the converse side of things, I would say.
I would agree with you, but I remember that I think the last game of the year, we played a team that preseason said they were going to be the number 1 defense in the country in UNC. So they might be kind of tough, but but Clemson might be out there too. Yeah, no, sorry. We're NC State fans. Got to take a dig at UNC when we can. But anyway, I think, we are definitely on the same page that definitely this is a game, especially in a tough environment like Clemson, where you cannot play from behind and expect to be able to work your way out easily, if not at all. And so I completely agree with you. Because the one thing as well, which I would say from watching the Wake Forest game for the most part, it seemed like there was a lot of times where Wake Forest would rush 3 or 4, give DJ a good amount of time. And you and I both agree that he's a good, if not great enough passer, that if you give him time, he will eventually find a way to make you pay. So, and I know because like looking at last year's game too, that one of the things that we did was really try and blitz a lot more to try and get to him, try and get under his skin a little bit, try and throw him off his game a little bit. I feel like, to me, that's really what you have to do with a guy like DJ, and especially too with an offense that doesn't have, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but definitely from what I've seen, definitely just doesn't have that stud wide receiver like a Mike Williams, like a Sammy Watkins, like DeAndre Hopkins, like it used to. Is that you have to get to him, and you have to trust that your cornerbacks and your defensive backs are going to be able to hold it down for those 3-4 seconds while your guys get to him. So would you kind of agree that if there was a way to kind of shut down DJ, that's how you have to do it? You have to blitz, you have to get to him, you have to get under his skin a little bit.
I think you definitely want to rush him. From Clemson's standpoint, they feel a lot better about the offensive line than they did a year ago. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Dakari Collins has really come on. Those two guys, Dakari and DJ, were high school teammates. So you kind of see them getting back, to good. Dakari's, he's about 6'3", 215, 220. So he's a pretty good sized guy. But they got a couple of freshmen, Adam Randall and Antonio Williams, who are starting to really come on. And it's part of the reason that Dakari Collins decided to head into the transfer portal, because his playing time was starting to be diminished. So, as these guys get a little bit more confident, you kind of saw that this weekend from them offensively. I think it really helps. And again, for the first time in a long time, the tight ends, both of them, Jake Brenningstool and Davis Allen, were really weapons for DJ. And so you add that into the mix, and now I think he's more confident. And I think he feels good about who he's got around him. That NC State game was still pretty early a year ago, but, I don't know where DJ was at that point. He was dealing with some things off the field with his family life. And so, he never made an excuse. He never said, hey, this is why I'm not playing great. And I think now, this Clemson Tiger offense has scored more points through 4 games than all but one Clemson offense in the history of the program. So they're off to, and last year's was the worst in Dabo Swinney's tenure.
Yeah.
Through 4 games. So they are now the second best in the history of the program offensively through 4 games, versus last year when they were the worst in Dabo Swinney's tenure. And that worst, I think they had I want to say they scored 76 points through the first 4 games of the season. Now they played Georgia out of the gates and only scored 3, but a year ago. But yeah, I mean, to have the second most prolific scoring offense that this program's ever had, and that's with Trevor, and that's with Deshaun, and that's with Taj Boyd at quarterback, and this one is more prolific offensively than that one. They got the benefit of a double overtime game for sure, but still, the numbers are the numbers.
Well, and obviously too, not to be kind of the one to throw it in, but I mean, for the State fans to keep in mind, is obviously, just like you were saying, Clemson started off last season playing Georgia. Well, this year they've played Georgia Tech, Furman, Louisiana Tech, and Wake Forest. So it's, I mean, at least shows that, at least from a Clemson side, that the offense is at least efficient of a sort. It's able to produce. But I think you and I could both agree, though.
The thing is, but they didn't produce all that well against Furman and La Tech, like you said.
Right. So, but at least they were able to put points on the board, is what I guess more what I'm saying.
Well, if they performed in those games like you and I both think they should have,
yeah, right,
they would have blown away the all-time mark. And if you go through all those years and all those seasons, because we're not talking about just 1 year.
Right.
The one-off of this whole thing was what happened last year when they only scored 70-some-odd points. I mean, every season, 4 games in, second most prolific scoring offense in Clemson history. And they don't always line up with Georgia game 1. That's for sure. But even still,
I think facing any team facing Georgia's defense last year definitely had their work cut out for them. So that's for sure.
And it was a pick 6. That's what maybe people don't. I don't know if y'all watched the game. It was a pick 6. It wasn't even like Georgia scored. That game was 3-3 and a pick 6 to win it. So I mean, that was. You talk about a boring and wild, exciting game. That was a boring, wild, and exciting game.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. So with that being said, we're going to take a pause right there here, and we'll jump into part 2 here as we'll talk about more of on the defense side, talk about predictions, kind of make or break situations, as well as got to talk a little bit about our guy Will Shipley that definitely, still kind of grinds our gears a little bit from the NC State side for sure. But again, first of all, want to give you opportunities. Obviously, the Clemson Sports Twitter page. Make sure to check them out. Wolfpack Nation for sure. And then, Lawton, where can they check out? Where can any NC State fan kind of check out any of the Clemson Sports media heading up to the Clemson game?
Yeah, so we're live every day from 4 to 6 on iHeartRadio. It's Fox Sports Radio 1400. Full website, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. And then, we've got podcasts that we do of the radio show every day. And most of that, if you're, I'm on Twitter at Clemson Sports. Super easy. You can find it there. And then we're the same on Instagram, just a ton of graphics and, all kind of stuff like that. So we got it covered, fully 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sometimes I wish it was only 6 months a year because I could use a little extra break, but
Sure.
It's full throttle most of the time, especially right now with college football rolling.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you so much again. Make sure, again, if you haven't already, Wolfpack Nation, again, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you're notified on all your devices whenever we release any new NC State content. Give this video a like if you're a big NC State fan just like us, and also give us a follow, Tuffy Talk Now on Twitter and Instagram if you haven't already. But thank you all so much again. Make sure to tune in for part 2 as we continue this conversation on. As always, go Pack, baby.